Tonight, we journey into the legend of Arion, the forgotten son of Hystus. Not a child of Olympus, but born from fire and forged in mortal steel. His destiny? To steal the eternal flame from Mount Olympus itself, and reignite the fading hearths of humankind. But the path ahead was no mere climb. It was guarded by beasts and burdened by prophecy, a three-headed hound from the depths below, a jealous god with winged sandals, and an oracle who saw only one future, Arion's death. So before you settle in, take a breath. Like and subscribe if you crave the kind of stories that braid myth with mystery. And tell us, where are you listening from? What time is it where you are? Some tales are better than sleep, others just make dreams burn brighter. Now dim the lights. Let the soft whirl of a fan fill the silence. And together, we'll unlock the story waiting in the coals. In the furnace-lit village of Myene, where metal bowed only to those who sweated and prayed, lived a woman who shaped legends. Callista, a mortal blacksmith whose arms swung not with force, but with grace that rivaled God's. Her hammer sang bronze into blades that split spears mid-flight. Her armor clung to warriors like second skin. It was whispered that even Ares once went to war in her work. The gods noticed. But only one descended, Hystus, the lame god of fire and forge. An outcast even among immortals, he watched Callista from the shadows. Not drawn to beauty, she wore soot as war paint, and her scent was of iron and pine, not perfume. Yet when she moved, he saw something divine. Something he knew. One blood-red moonlit night, cloaked in ash and silence, Hystus stepped into her forge. He brought no gifts, made no demands. Only watched. That night, the flames leapt higher. And 9 moons later, a child was born. Arion. He did not cry. His eyes opened, glowing like embers. The forge flared, as if greeting its kin. The midwives froze. One gasped, touched by the divine. Another crossed herself. And the eldest whispered, "He won't stay long in this world." Arion grew swiftly. At 5, he bent iron to will. At 7, he forged a blade so perfect, it hummed with heat and purpose. He never played, never lied. His presence unsettled villagers. They saw in him not a child, but a curse, a god's son without a god's place. Children avoided him. Priests turned their backs. But Callista, she held him close. She taught him not just to wield fire, but to listen. Flame obeys those who hear, she would say, not those who command. By the time Arion reached his 16th year, his forge burned without rest, daylight or dark, crafting weapons destined for cities he would never walk, for rulers whose names he'd never hear aloud. But beneath the rhythmic clang of metal and the hiss of cooling steel, something deeper stirred within him. He was not born to serve kings. He was born to challenge fate. Long ago, the eternal flame had been stolen from the heavens by Prometheus, wrested from divine hands and gifted to man. It was more than heat. It was thought, it was vision. It was the soul of invention, the fire that separated man from beast. But the age of rebellion had cooled. Mankind had forgotten its bold inheritance, and the gods, offended, had turned their faces away. It began as a whisper. Hearths that once glowed through the longest winters fell dark. Forests froze. Storms grew crueler. Even spring carried a chill. Children clutched each other in homes where chimneys stood cold. Old women whispered prayers into ashes that would no longer burn. Priests preached of wrath. Scholars searched the stars. But across empires and farmsteads alike, a different fear took root, not that the world would end, but that the gods had already left it behind. High atop Mount Olympus, the gods had locked away the final living ember, the divine flame, sealed in a sacred brazier, hidden from mortal touch for centuries. No god dared offer it again. They feared what Prometheus had begun, and muttered among themselves, "Let them suffer. Let them remember their place." Yet not all divine hearts agreed. In the groves and hollows of the world, whispers stirred. The Dryads spoke of a boy who burned like coal. Nymphs saw fire dance behind the eyes of a young blacksmith from Myene. The wind carried a name, Irion. In the fading halls of Delhi, the last oracle dreamed of fire with feet, a living blaze walking the earth, igniting cities with its stride. In forgotten sanctuaries, where candles had long sputtered out, flames flickered to life once more at the strike of Irion's hammer. He didn't yet know. He only felt the iron resisting more with each day. The forge demanded longer breath to keep its heat. The warmth, once so faithful, now slipped from his grasp. But the world was watching. Gods, long silent, turned their gaze to Myene. In Olympus, the divine flame behind marble and mist stirred, its light fluttering not for a god's touch, but for a mortal soul born of flame and longing. And within Irion, something ancient began to burn. Meanwhile, Delhi, the once sacred seat of Apollo's voice, was crumbling. Its columns split by time, its sacred pools now mist and stone. Where once kings and warriors climbed to hear divine counsel, silence reigned. Ivy crept across broken altars, clinging like memory. Thunder rumbled in the skies, not of storms, but of something older, watchful, waiting. Irion entered with quiet footsteps. No one welcomed him. The torches were cold. The halls hollow. He descended into the oracle's chamber, into the mountain's breath itself, where generations before him had knelt to beg the gods for mercy. And though he did not beg, the mountain listened. There, seated atop a broken throne of ancient stone, waited the oracle. She wore robes the color of twilight storms, deep violet and heavy with dust. Her skin was as pale as extinguished ash, and though her eyes were blind, they burned with the fury of distant lightning. Before a single word could leave his mouth, she inhaled sharply, as if drawing in the world itself like a lantern sucking back its flame. "Hyen," she hissed, though he had spoken no name. He stood silent. "You will climb the mountain. You will take the flame. And you will die." Her words lashed through the air like thunder cracking bone. He did not move. He had heard of oracles, their cryptic rhymes and layered riddles. But this was no riddle. This was judgment. She rose, not as mortals do, but like smoke pulled upward by unseen wind. "The gods will stand against you. The world will crave your failure. The flame you seek is not from mortal hands. It was stolen once, and the thief paid with eternity in chains." Irion stepped closer, fists curled tight. "Then let me pay." Silence fell. Then came the sound of laughter, worn and weary, the echo of someone who had seen too many endings carved the same way. "You already are," she murmured. Darkness deepened. Outside, thunder climbed like a drumbeat. The air grew heavy with something forgotten, something older than time. Then, stillness. The oracle sank back into her seat. Her mouth opened, and only smoke drifted out. Her prophecy was finished. Irion said nothing. He left. But her words followed. In firelight, in shadows, in the echo of every hammer strike in his forge. The gods had spoken. His course was set. But Olympus had never truly known what would happen when the dying world took fire back into its hands. For one to ascend the mountain, one must first earn its recognition. And Olympus bowed to none unproven. Legends claimed its roots were not stone, but soul. That its base was guarded by the gate of silence, and behind that gate, the oldest terror ever shaped, Cerberus, the hound of Hades. None passed without first touching death. Irion did not flinch. He had studied myths like a blacksmith studies heat, attentively, carefully, dangerously. He knew what waited beneath Olympus. To reach the eternal flame, he would not rise, he would descend. And so he prepared not with sword or shield, but with smithing. For 3 days and nights he forged a collar, not of war, but of reverence. Forged from obsidian, iron, and the last ember pulled from his mother's forge. Into it he carved 3 names, one for each head of the beast. He spoke them with every strike of the hammer. Memory, loyalty, grief. On the 4th day, he stood before a cavern whose mouth was darker than night and colder than truth. The wind did not bite flesh, it scraped soul. The air did not stink of decay, it carried the scent of abandoned prayers. He stepped in, deeper and deeper, past bones that shimmered faintly like old starlight, past torches that ignited without flame, until he heard it, breathing, slow, enormous, layered, like 3 storms sleeping beside one another. Cerberus. He stepped into the clearing and found the beast resting atop a bed of ash and bone, its massive form curled in slumber, each of its 3 heads twitching to a rhythm all their own. Its fur was darker than night itself, darker even than the thought of absence. Though its eyes were closed, its ears flicked sharply at every rustle. Arion did not draw steel. Instead, he knelt. With steady hands, he offered the collar, a band forged in silence, carved with runes older than Olympus. Then he began to hum. It was the lullaby of his childhood, the one his mother whispered on nights when shadows stretched too long, and the world felt too large to bear. The middle head shifted. The left blinked open a single amber eye. The right growled low and sharp, but did not move. And then they listened. In that moment of stillness, Arion slipped the collar around their shared neck. Cerberus exhaled, a breath not of menace, but of recognition. Behind them, the stone door groaned open. Not in fury. In respect. Death had met the boy's gaze and, without a word, stepped aside. The path to Olympus was no true path at all. No signposts. No constellations. Just sheer rock, unforgiving wind, and voices that whispered from the void. Arion climbed, not with certainty, but with instinct. His hands bled like any mortal. His divine blood boiled like living ember. The mountain rejected him at every turn, testing each step with fury. And then he appeared, not with thunder or flame, but with quiet. Hermes. The trickster. The messenger. The watcher of crossroads. He stood on a ledge, leaned casually like a man waiting for a friend. Cloak loose around his shoulders. Sandals feather-laced. His eyes glinted like shattered glass. Well, Hermes said, spinning a coin between his fingers. You're shorter than I imagined. Arion said nothing. He kept climbing. I know why you're here, Hermes continued, drifting beside him without moving a muscle. You're here for the flame. You want to bring it back to the mortals. Sweet. Noble. Stupid. Arion paused. Then stop me. Hermes laughed, a low, sharp thing. Stop you? No. I'm not here for that. I'm here to make sure you understand what you're breaking. He gestured wide, toward the unseen heights above. You're stepping into Olympus. Into the gods' vault. Into a myth that does not belong to you. And yet, Arion said, here I am. That grin faltered. Just slightly. You're trying to mend a balance that shattered for a reason, Hermes said. The flame, what Prometheus stole, was never meant to last. It was a mistake the gods decided never to repeat. And now they guard it not because it's precious, but because it's dangerous. Arion locked eyes with him. Then maybe they've forgotten what danger looks like. For the first time, Hermes went still. The coin vanished. The wind sharpened. The air around them darkened like a held breath. You think you're Prometheus, he said coldly. But you're not even a shadow of him. I'm not trying to be him, Arion replied. I'm here to finish what he began. Hermes stepped close. His fingers pressed against Arion's chest, gentle, yet undeniable. Then here's my gift. And pain rushed in, not through flesh, but deeper. It twisted something ancient inside him, like a thread being pulled from the center of his soul. The fire you seek, Hermes whispered, will burn away everything you are. Then, with a gust of wind and a shimmer of gold, he vanished. The mountain groaned. Thunder followed, slow at first, then rolling with the gravity of judgment. This was no storm of rain. It was a reckoning. Arion climbed. Cursed, but unyielding. The curse sank into him, not like a dagger, but like frost in the lungs. At first, it was faint, a slight catch in his breath, a strange heat beneath the skin. But as he rose, the affliction grew. It didn't wound him. It wore him down, scraping him away piece by piece, leaving something raw, exposed. Mount Olympus was no longer stone. It breathed. Its cliffs shifted underfoot. Wind howled through its ravines, not like air, but like old voices, furious to be disturbed. And the higher he climbed, the more the world turned unnatural. The trees stopped growing. The birds fell silent. Even the stars seemed to retreat. There were no trails here. Only jagged edges and ledges that demanded blood for passage. Arion bled. He stumbled. Once, he nearly plummeted, but a sudden flare of heat in his chest pulled him back from death's edge. The flame Hermes warned of had begun to stir. And still he climbed, because every time his knees buckled, he thought of the cold hearths. The villages cloaked in ash. The children curled in corners, whispering warmth into their palms. He saw his mother, burned hands, sleepless eyes, still forging flame for a world forgetting how to feel it. Yet Olympus showed no mercy. Storm clouds circled above, lightning crawling along the cliffs like restless gods pacing. Arion could feel them watching now, judging, daring him to fall. But it wasn't just the peak resisting him, it was Olympus itself. He passed through ruins etched into the mountain's flesh. Abandoned temples, where faith had withered. Altars crumbled. Statues defaced, Athena's gaze scratched out, Zeus's columns cracked and toppled. And that's when Arion understood a truth few dared to whisper. The gods were afraid. Not of mortals failing, but of one succeeding. Of a man bringing back the flame without kneeling first. Of light returning to the world without their blessing. And so they threw everything at him: ice, wind, illusions, voices that begged and lied. Still he rose. With hands torn open and breath turned to smoke, Arion climbed above the clouds. And then he saw it. Lit not by sun, but by the glow of something older than dawn, the brazier. It stood alone. No fanfare. No golden gates. No divine procession. Only silence. And the flame. It waited atop a pedestal of black stone, in a clearing where even the wind dared not enter. The brazier itself looked ancient, older than myths, shaped by forgotten hands in a time before time. Within it danced the eternal flame. Not red. Not gold. White. Blinding. Still. Alive. It didn't flicker. It watched. Arion stepped closer. The fire did not burn. It moved into him, like it had been searching. Like it remembered. His breath caught. His skin prickled. And Olympus held its breath. That ember Hermes had cursed into his chest now pulsed with the rhythm of a second heart, ancient, alive, and reaching. It called out to the eternal flame like a long-lost twin, desperate for reunion. Arion extended his hand. And the world held its breath. In that instant, time unraveled. He saw cities etched in firelight, glowing like constellations across the land. He saw his mother's forge roaring in defiance against winter's bite. He saw civilizations rise, worship fire, build empires around it, and forget, again and again, why it had burned in the first place. And then, he saw the punishment. Prometheus, chained to a cliff, his flesh torn anew each day by a vulture's beak. The gods called it balance. Arion saw only fear, fear dressed in robes and golden laurels. He could walk away. Let the world adapt to cold, forget the flame, forget him. But then the wind whispered her name, Callista. And he remembered. He seized the flame. And it seized him in return. Pain, pure and unfathomable, screamed through every vein, not the agony of burning, but the transformation of being rewritten. Bones cracked, reshaped by divine force. His skin glowed with molten light. His blood blazed like rivers of sunrise. He fell to his knees, roaring without sound as the flame consumed every fiber of the boy, and forged something new. A bearer. A vessel. A God-touched torch. He no longer held the fire. He was the fire. The brazier behind him flickered once, then dimmed, and died. The eternal flame had unchained itself from Olympus. It had chosen another. Arion collapsed beside the now cold pedestal. Smoke curled gently from his fingertips, but his eyes burned bright as dawnlight. His chest rose barely, but each breath sent warmth spiraling outward, carried by wind down the mountain, toward a world that had forgotten warmth. He had taken the fire. But not for glory. Not for vengeance. For everyone. Arion did not descend Olympus as a man. He carried Olympus within him. The moment the flame entered him, the mountain softened. The wind fell quiet. The sky, once shrouded in storm, peeled back to reveal stars. Even the rock beneath his boots shifted to meet his steps, not as a trespasser, but as kin. He had become a flame the world would follow. His body shimmered with divine heat, not the heat that destroys, but the heat that awakens. Wherever his feet touched stone, frost withdrew. With each exhale, the cursed wind lost its bite. The air no longer reeked of smoke, it smelled of rain-soaked earth, of beginnings. But the burden was real. His limbs shook beneath the weight of the flame's memory. For it was not just warmth, it was history. He felt it all. The first spark struck in a darkened cave. The torch that ignited Athens. The forge that built Troy's final wall. Every blaze, every hope, every war waged for the fire of the gods now lived inside him. He saw the cities that had burned. The temples that had fallen. The blood spilled not by the gods, but by those who misunderstood their gifts. The fire had never been innocent. But Arion would not return it as a weapon. He walked through cloud and silence, past the statues of gods now forgotten, their marble faces crumbling into dust and moss. He passed the mouth of the underworld, where once Cerberus stood sentinel, but the beast was gone. As if even death itself had stepped aside for what Arion had become. And then, he stepped down into the world once more. Carrying the flame not for himself, but for all. And there, in a village long swallowed by frost where hearths had not glowed in generations, the people gathered. Not in fear, but wonder. Arion said nothing. He simply raised his hand, and from his fingertips, a flame unfurled like a breath of dawn. It leapt into the nearest hearth. It roared alive. Then another hearth. And another. Warmth bloomed like music, rushing from home to home, sweeping through city streets and forgotten roads, across lands that had only known fire through prayers and memory. Arion burned. His hair shimmered like threads of molten gold. His skin cracked like cooled obsidian under strain. He was not dying. He was changing. He had not stolen the flame. He had become it. And everywhere it reached, the world didn't kneel, but whispered his name. Not in worship. In gratitude. No tomb was ever carved for Arion. No marble statue raised. No hymns echoed in temples. No procession marked his last breath. And yet he never vanished. After the fires returned, strange things began to stir. In far-off villages untouched by travelers, hearths would light themselves at dusk. Frozen groves blossomed overnight in radiant bloom. Blacksmiths claimed their furnaces sparked before bellows moved. And children, wrapped in blankets, whispered that they saw a glowing figure standing by the fire just before it rose. No one ever proved a thing, but every tale told the same truth. He walked until there was nothing left of him to walk with. His body did not perish from pain, but from purpose. It split and burned not in defeat, but in transformation. What remained of Arion, his bone, his voice, his soul, became ember, wind, warmth. And he gave all of it away. The last place touched by his light was the forge of his mother. Old. Silent. Forgotten. Its fires dead for decades. Until one night, a traveler passing through swore he saw a boy, hammering white-hot metal at the anvil. The shape was blurred in the heat, but the rhythm was familiar. When the man blinked, the forge stood empty. But the fire, oh, the fire, danced high again, just as it once had. They say the gods felt it. That Olympus trembled. Not from anger, but recognition. For even the immortals understood, Arion had not rebelled with arrogance or steel. He had reminded them of their first purpose. And so the flame, once locked in the heavens, now lived in every place that welcomed light. It shimmered in soup passed between strangers, in candles lit by grieving hands, in torches carried by rebels who still believed the dark could be undone. And always, always, they whispered his name, Arion. Some say when your flame flickers for no reason, it's him passing through. Others swear that if you lean close enough to a fire, the crackle carries the rhythm of a hammer, soft, steady, enduring. Because Arion never died. He became warmth. Not a god. Not a legend. Just a boy who gave everything. To help the world remember how to glow again. In the harsh lands of Sparta, where boys were taught to wield a blade before they could walk, and glory was etched deep into bone, women were forged no less fiercely. Among them rose one whose name struck like thunder through marble colonnades, Leonthe, daughter of Commander Adrastos. She was born beneath a blood-red eclipse, as wolves howled over the city and lightning clawed the distant hills. Midwives whispered she was no mortal child, that she was born of Ares himself. By 12, she had thrown her brothers to the sand in the wrestling pit. By 16, she led a hunting party into the Tethys Mountains and returned with 3 wild boars lashed behind her chariot. Leonthe was not simply honored. She was feared. She walked the Spartan agora with a back unbent and footsteps like falling stone. Men cast their gazes downward. Women watched her with a silence filled by awe and envy. She rarely spoke unless required, and when she did, her words were like arrows, straight, few, never wasted. Yet, beneath the armor, behind the steel-cut discipline, there was something softer few ever saw. When her cuirass was laid beside the bed, when torches dimmed and the hum of Sparta faded into night, Leonthe would lie awake and gaze at the stars. Not with a soldier's defiance, but with longing. A quiet ache the warrior code had no word for. Not conquest. Not marriage. Not even glory. Something older. Something forgotten. Every full moon, when Sparta slept and the clamor of drills was hushed, her body would pull her to the cliffs above the river Eurytus. There she shed her spear, her title, her blood-bound duty, and walked as only herself, a lone soul beneath the cosmos. She believed the world had to be larger than Sparta, greater than honor, deeper than sharpened steel. It stirred in her blood like music too distant to hear, yet undeniably playing. And one night, under a blade-sharp sky of silver and shadow, she saw it. In a hidden grove, concealed between twin cliffs, a still pool glistened like polished obsidian. There, adrift like a ghost, was a swan, silent, watching. Moonlight shimmered on its back, casting it in a glow more beautiful than any war cry could summon. From that moment, something shifted. Leonthi, who had known only the rhythm of sword and shield, began to turn towards something quieter. Stranger. Far more perilous. The grove was sacred. Untouched by Spartan sandals, undisturbed by human hands. It breathed of a time before Sparta, before Olympus, before names. The trees bent in crescent arches, silver with ancient moonlight. The lake at their center was a mirror, smooth and still, as if time had stopped just above its surface. And on it floated the swan. Its feathers gleamed like thread pulled from stars, either white nor gray, but something otherworldly. It glided not like a creature, but like a thought moving across the water without stirring a single ripple. Its neck curved in elegance that seemed sculpted by gods. And its eyes, gods, its eyes, were not the eyes of any beast. They did not fear. They did not flee. They simply knew. Leonthi froze just beyond the tree-line. Every part of her training screamed for caution. Nothing in the wild moved like this. No creature stood its ground so calmly before a human. But the swan did not flee. It watched her, serene, steady, as though it had been expecting her. She stepped forward. The swan tilted its head, inquisitive. Another cautious step. The lake lay still, glassy and untouched. She stopped at the water's edge, her breath even but alert, fingers resting near the dagger strapped along her thigh. The swan drifted toward her, slow and purposeful. When it reached the shallows, it bowed its head, just slightly. Leonthi knelt. She had seen horrors. War camps smoldering in ruin, warriors with screams torn from their lungs, newborn calves shaking in first breaths. But never had she witnessed anything so still, so impossibly quiet, so sacred. She reached out. The swan didn't flinch. Her fingertips brushed its feathers, warm, impossibly warm, like they held sunlight rather than blood. And something shifted inside her. Not fear, not wonder. Something deeper. Ancient. A connection she hadn't known was missing until that very moment. The swan blinked once and turned away, gliding back across the moonlit lake. Leonthi remained kneeling, heart slowed but awake in a new way. She didn't know what had just begun, only that it was not chance. The next full moon, she returned. And so did the swan. Again the following month. And again. No words passed between them. No promises made. Just presence, repeated, quiet, sacred. A ritual without altar or priest. Only silence and gravity. By the time autumn laid gold across the hills, Leonthi no longer wondered why she came. She simply knew the swan would be there. And that this, whatever it was, had changed her. The seasons cycled. Leaves burned amber, fell, and returned again. Below the hills, the world raged on. Wars flared and faded. But in the grove by the lake, beneath the full moons, time forgot to move. Only those nights mattered now. Leonthi had once measured her life in scars and victories. Commands followed, battles won. But something softer had taken root in her. Something older than Spartan law. Each month, she came bearing offerings, figs still sticky with sap, linen woven by her own hand, small trinkets carved from olive wood. The swan never ate, never touched the gifts. Yet she continued, drawn by something she couldn't explain. The swan always waited. It would meet her at the edge of the water, dip its head with quiet recognition, and drift alongside her. Sometimes it circled her. Sometimes it simply stood beside her, its warmth spilling into the night like an unseen sun. And she began to speak. Not like a warrior. Like someone who had never been heard before. She spoke of her father's silence. Of victories that rang hollow. Of nights she lay beneath the stars, asking if there was more to life than sword and stone. And the swan listened. The swan never spoke. But it listened. And Leon could feel it, deeply, unmistakably. Its stillness wasn't emptiness. It was presence. The kind of attention no Spartan commander had ever offered. Not a suitor. Not even a friend. It wasn't the silence of absence, but of devotion. In time, she no longer felt alone. Before each visit, she began to braid her hair. She smoothed her robes. She sat by the swan in the silver hush of night, her shoulder resting lightly against its feathered wing. They spoke little, yet in that quiet communion she felt more seen than in any palace, more understood than on any battlefield. And always, the swan remained, unchanged, unaging, unwavering. She should have feared it. Every tale warned of gods cloaking themselves in fur or feather to tempt mortals into ruin. Curses for those who dared to love the divine. But Leondine no longer believed in stories. She believed in what she felt. The way her hand curved so naturally around the swan's neck. The way it bowed its head when she hummed into the wind. The way it seemed to wait for her, need her. There were no vows, no explanations. Just silence, and something ancient blooming within it. She didn't say the word. Not aloud. Not even to herself. But she knew. It was love. For the swan was not of the earth. Its wings had once spanned the heavens. Its hands had once plucked strings that stirred the sun to rise. Its name had once echoed in marble halls, whispered in temples, etched in hymns and fire. Apollo, the god of music, of prophecy, of light, now wordless, winged, bound. Long before Leondi was born, Apollo had defied Zeus, not with sword or storm, but with truth. He had spoken out. Against cruelty masked as law. Against silence wielded as power. He had questioned Olympus itself. And for that Zeus did not kill him. He unmade him. Stripped him of voice, of form, of fire. Cast into the body of a swan, not as punishment, but as mockery, a luminous god caged in silence. Not to humble him, but to remind him that even suns could be eclipsed by shadow. And then came the deeper cruelty, a curse. If any mortal ever uncovered who he truly was, the transformation would become permanent. Apollo, once divine, would be swan forever. So he waited. Ages passed. Lakes froze and thawed. Stars shifted. Mortals forgot his name. Temples crumbled. Songs faded. And still, he drifted, half myth, half memory, watching the world grow colder as Olympus withdrew. Until Leondi. Her presence stirred something buried even deeper than rage or grief. Something Olympus had long since discarded. Hope. He had never intended to be found. But she returned again. And her voice, low and unceremonious, was the only thing in centuries that made him feel warmth again. She was no priestess. No oracle. No child of fate. She was a warrior. Scarred. Steeled. Hardened by discipline and grief. Trained to kill, trained not to feel. And yet, she saw him. Not as a beast. Not as a relic. But as something sacred. Something, waiting. He dared not speak. He dared not risk it. But in the tilt of his head, in the still quiet of his feathers, he answered every question she never asked. And slowly, impossibly, unbearably, he loved her back. In Sparta, solitude was respected, but never indulged for long. Leonti's absences, once overlooked, began to draw eyes. Each full moon, she slipped away, leaving behind the clang of swords, the drills of discipline, the hard gazes of her commanders and blood-bound kin. At first, no one dared question her. She was Leonti, untouchable, unshakable, a warrior whose loyalty had been etched into her skin by flame and scar. But Sparta thrived on structure, on symmetry, on control. And love, especially the kind unspoken, had no place in a city carved from duty. The whispers began. She wanders. She grows quiet in council. She strikes, but without fury. And it was true. Leonti had changed. Her movements still held precision, but the cruelty had vanished. Her voice had lost its edge, and in her gaze flickered something unfamiliar, something soft. Some nights she even smiled, not at anyone, but at thoughts too private for words. As if carrying a secret even the gods couldn't wrest from her soul. Her father noticed first. Commander Adrastos, a man carved from iron, whose brow had never learned to bend, whose daughters were born to command legions, not emotions. He summoned her one evening under the pretense of military planning. But once the chamber was empty, his words struck bare. "What keeps you from sleep?" She said nothing. His tone hardened. "Do not forget who you are." But she already had, or rather, she had left behind the shape Sparta forced her into. What the city had forged in stone, the swan had softened with stillness. And Leonti found she had no desire to return. Still, Sparta watched. A patrol followed her once, beyond the walls, beneath the cliffs, past the olive groves. They lost her. She was too skilled to be tracked, too careful to leave a trail. But it was enough. Enough for suspicion to take root. The priests began whispering. Of omens. Of moonlight carrying voices. Of lakes rippling with unnatural stillness. Of a warrior woman who vanished with every full moon. They feared it was madness. Or worse, divine. Leonti knew the circle was tightening. The eyes that once respected her distance now followed her path. Silence, once her shield, had become a signal. And yet, she still went. Still returned to the grove. Still found him. And there, where moonlight brushed against feathers, she shed Sparta like a second skin. She forgot duty. Forgot danger. Forgot everything but the warmth in that silent ritual. Only one thing mattered now, staying unseen. Because if Sparta discovered what she carried in her heart, it would burn them both to ash. That night, the moon hung low, bloated and golden, like a flame too proud to die. Leonti stood in her chamber, fingers trembling at her armor. She couldn't fasten the last clasp. Her body, forged for war, had begun to shake. Something had shifted. She had felt it for days, an uneasy hum beneath the earth, a tension in the wind. As if the land itself braced for something. Something she could feel, but could not name. The swan was different the last time she saw it. Restless. More alert. Its feathers lifted with every gust of wind as though bracing for something unseen. It circled her twice before settling, and where its warmth once calmed her, now it burned, sharp, uneasy. That night sleep evaded her. And when it finally came, it did not bring rest. In her dream, she stood alone in a silver grove. Her hands shimmered with gold dust. Before her loomed a statue, half man, half swan, frozen mid-flight. Its wings arched upward, its face serene yet hollow. She reached for it, and spoke a name she hadn't known she carried. Apollo. The statue cracked. A voice echoed, not from the air, but from within her very bones. Truth will freeze what love has kindled. She woke with a gasp, her heart hammering. The name still burned on her lips. She tried to cast it off as dream-born nonsense. But a warrior knows when a chill is more than weather. This was not imagination. It was prophecy. At dawn, she left Sparta earlier than usual. The ache in her chest had sharpened into something unbearable. She didn't follow her usual route. Her feet took her deeper into the hills, past unfamiliar trees, into wilds untouched even by memory. There, beneath draping ivy and age-worn moss, she found it. An ancient altar, cracked, half-buried, but unmistakably sacred. Carved into its stone in faded gold was a single word, Apollon. Her breath caught. Everything came crashing together. The swan's knowing gaze. The dreams. The warmth. The full moons. The curse. The name in her bones. He wasn't simply enchanted. He was divine. And she had broken something ancient by knowing it. She stumbled backward. Behind her, the soft whisper of feathers. The swan had followed. Silent as always. But now, that silence no longer soothed her. It felt like farewell. The swan watched her, not with the serenity of before, but with sorrow. As if it had always known. As if her knowing was the final thread. And it had snapped. The grove no longer breathed gently. The air thickened, pulsing like the breath of a sleeping god stirred too soon. Moonlight rippled across the lake, fractured and trembling. The trees stood as witnesses, ancient, solemn, and still. Leonti stood motionless before the altar, the name Apollo still echoing through her like a spear buried in stone. She turned slowly, as though movement itself might unmake the truth. But it was already done. The swan stood there, no longer gliding or graceful. Just still. Watching. Its feathers had dulled. The shimmer gone. Its light dimming. She stepped forward. Her lips parted to speak, but no words came. What could she possibly say to undo a god's undoing? I know, she whispered. The wind stopped. A single feather loosed from the swan's back. It drifted downward like a final breath and turned to dust the moment it touched the altar. And then, the transformation began. The swan's neck arched, not with elegance, but with pain. Its body shook. The air itself seemed to pull tight around it. The truth had been spoken, and the curse had awakened. Feathers unraveled into liquid gold, dissolving into light as wings curled into arms and webbed feet split into toes that rooted into the earth. And where the swan had stood, now knelt a man, naked, radiant, breaking beneath the weight of his return. Apollo. His hair shimmered like morning sky before the sun has fully risen. His skin glowed faintly, as though lit from beneath by buried fire. But his eyes no longer held the clarity of gods. They were dimmed, not by age, but by sorrow. By the ache of something inevitable. Leonti stumbled back, hand over her mouth. She had loved him in silence. And now, silence had become unbearable. He opened his mouth to speak, but the curse had not yet loosened its grip. His voice cracked like distant thunder in an old, tired storm. You were never meant to know, he said at last, voice scarcely more than a breeze. It was the only rule. She fell to her knees beside him, tears spilling down the face that war had hardened, carving lines like rivers down ancient stone. I didn't mean to, she whispered. He smiled, only once. It was the smile of a god, not of joy, but of farewell. I know. And then the earth beneath them trembled, not with sound, but with judgment. A silent sentence passed by the divine. His glow began to fade. The warmth of his skin dulled. Limbs stiffened mid-motion. Apollo was turning to stone. Leonti could only watch as love became legend. The moment his name was spoken aloud, the curse moved to complete its work. His once fluid body began to still, divinity leaking from him like dying light. The radiance beneath his skin dimmed like coals losing breath. Golden strands of hair stiffened into marble threads as Zeus's punishment finished what it had begun. There would be no forgiveness. No plea would reach Olympus now. She grasped his hands, still warm, still trembling. But she could feel it, the stone creeping over him like frost devouring the living. His fingers curled around hers one last time, and then stilled. She shook her head. No. No, not like this. Not here. But the curse did not listen. It had waited generations, patient, precise, merciless. Apollo's chest rose one final time, and then fell still. His wings, half formed in memory of what he once was, froze behind his shoulders. His knees locked mid-bend, carved in silent grief. His face, still beautiful, still kind, captured a moment suspended between love and pain. Eyes open, but no longer seeing. Then, silence. Not the silence of rest, or even peace, but the silence of something sacred broken. Leonthe knelt beside him, pressing her forehead to the hand that had once cradled stars, now cold and unyielding. Her tears traced the stone fingers, falling one after the other, slow, deliberate, as if each was a prayer unspoken. A funeral hymn without voice. The grove dimmed. Even the moon, so often full and glowing, withdrew behind a curtain of cloud. No thunder followed. No god appeared. Because the punishment was already complete. Zeus had spoken. The swan had flown for the final time. And Apollo, the god of light, now stood in eternal silence, his final truth carved in marble. Leonthe remained long after the last transformation ended. Arms wrapped around what was left. She did not scream. She did not curse the heavens. There were no Spartans to witness. No warriors to carry the story. Only the wind. Only the trees. And the stone figure of a god who had once loved her. Not with lightning. Not with fire. But with stillness. And from that moment on, she never returned to Sparta. Leonthe left her armor where it lay, beside the altar, cold and forgotten. She unstrapped her sword and laid down the name forged in war, letting it drift like smoke over the moonlit lake. The woman who once stood proud among kings now knelt, quietly, beside a statue that would never move again. The grove became her world. With every full moon, she returned. She never missed one. She brought no incense, no offerings, no prayers, only herself. And a memory. She would sit beside the statue of Apollo, her fingers tracing the once living hand now cold in stone. Sometimes she whispered. Sometimes she sang, soft melodies the god had never heard, yet seemed somehow his. Other nights she said nothing at all, just watching the lake ripple with moonlight. Whispers began to circle among the villagers. They said a woman haunted the highlands, wandering beneath silver skies with eyes like starlight. Some called her mad. Others claimed she had been chosen. But none dared disturb her. Years turned like leaves. Winters howled, empires shifted, and the old gods fell into silence. But Leonthe remained. Time weathered her, but never broke her. She did not weaken. Her strength rooted deep, not in muscle, but in stillness, like an ancient olive tree that clings to its soil through storm after storm. And always the statue endured. Apollo, caught mid-kneel, his marble wings unfurled halfway behind him. His gaze forever fixed on the space where Leonthe sat. A moment frozen, not in sorrow, but in presence. A fragment of eternity untouched by time. Travelers began to speak of strange things. They said the statue was warm to the touch. That if you placed a hand on its chest, you could feel something faint, like a heartbeat trapped between dreams. Then, on one final full moon, Leonthe came once more. She sat longer than usual. She laid her head softly on his shoulder, and she never rose again. When villagers found her weeks later, she was still there, peaceful. Her eyes closed. A faint smile curved on her lips. Beside her, Apollo's statue shimmered ever so slightly, as if lit from within. No one touched it. No shrine was raised. No temple built. But the story spread. And now, when the moon is high and the wind goes quiet, some say the swan returns to the lake. Not to be seen, but to remember. Milanian was not born in a palace, nor beneath the vaulted ceiling of a temple. He came into the world beneath a willow tree during a storm that tore the heavens apart. His mother, a midwife's daughter, wrapped him in linen as thunder cracked the sky. Rain lashed the hills. Birds scattered. But the newborn did not cry. He hummed. From his earliest days, music followed him. Streams sang when he drank from them. Leaves shivered in harmony as he passed. No one taught him melody. He didn't need to learn it. Sound belonged to him. By the time he was 10, he could echo any bird's song and bend it into something new. By 16, he played the lyre with such haunting beauty that even war-hardened men would stop mid-step, arrested by the sound. He sang of rivers, of brothers lost to battle, of wheat fields before war, and his voice stirred tears from eyes that hadn't wept in decades. People called him a wonder, a miracle, a child of divine breath. He never claimed it. He only played. Milanian wandered from village to village, offering his music not for coin, not for fame, but for the simple purpose of healing. His voice eased fevers. His strings softened even the most hardened hearts. It was said that once, he played for a dying child who, upon hearing his lullaby, smiled, and drifted into death, as if into a gentle dream. But not all ears that listened belonged to mortals. One spring evening, seated beside a river that shimmered like a spilled constellation, Milanian played a melody about starlight and longing. And as the notes rippled through the air, the world around him slowed. The wind paused mid-breath. The current stilled. Even the frogs in the reeds held their song. And then they appeared. The Muses. 9 figures stepped forward from the unseen edge of the world, wrapped in light and resonance. Each carried the weight of her domain, history, tragedy, dance, poetry, and more. Their eyes held neither cruelty nor warmth, only understanding. They listened. Then, to Milanian's wonder, they sang back. 9 voices intertwined in perfect harmony, older than memory, older than time. He closed his eyes and answered with his own voice, not to echo, but to elevate, to entwine and transform. When the final note faded, even the stars above seemed to lean closer. Kali, eldest of the 9, stepped forward and pressed her fingers to his brow. "You are no ordinary man," she said. "You are a vessel." And from that moment, the legend of Milanian began, the bard whose voice could tremble the heavens. He was no longer just gifted. He was marked, chosen, whispered about. The Muses led him to the hidden folds of Mount Hell, a place where few dared walk. Beneath canopies untouched by ambition, under skies free from war and want, Milanian was not taught in words, but in experience. Kali, muse of epic, taught him to fold an empire into a song. Clio whispered entire histories into his dreams. Terpsira danced barefoot through falling leaves while his hands learned the rhythm of movement and wind. You placed her flute in his palm and said only, "Listen." And so he did. He listened to more than melody. He listened to truth. The kind that flickers between silence and sorrow. The kind that can't be named, but always lingers, in the hush before a storm, in the hush after goodbye, in the gasp of a child at the first snow. The Muses gave him no powers, only perspective. And they asked one thing in return: sing. Not for them, but for the world. For mortals. For the broken and the brave, the proud and the forgotten. Sing so they might remember that even in ruin, beauty remains. That a song can be salve, or sword. At first, Melanion did just that. He performed in bustling forums and quiet fields, beneath banners and beside hearths. He played for kings and beggars alike. His music stitched what had been torn, fathers to daughters, enemies to uneasy peace, hearts cracked by grief. But as his voice grew richer, so did something else, ambition. He began chasing melodies untouched by god or muse. Notes not gifted, but hunted. In the dead hours of night, he wrote alone, pouring fragments onto parchment, fragments of something beyond language. A final song. A song to still time. To silence wind. To move stone to tears. He told no one, not even the muses. Because part of him no longer wanted to serve the divine. He wanted to surpass it. And the muses, ever watchful, noticed the change. Not in Melanion's fingers, but in his eyes, the way they reached beyond them, as if the applause of mortals had grown too small for what stirred inside. As if destiny owed him something more than admiration. Far off, fate stirred. Because no mortal lingers in the presence of divinity without paying a price. Melanion withdrew. He left behind the thunder of clapping hands, the endless gifts of kings, the garlands of cities. He silenced his lyre. He stopped teaching. He no longer spoke to the muses. Whispers filled the world, that he was ill, or dead, or broken. But the truth was quieter. He had journeyed to the shadowed slopes of Mount Helicon, deeper than any mortal had dared tread. A place where the breath of old gods still echoed faintly against stone, where even birds grew quiet. In a cave lined with crystals that shimmered at the touch of dawnlight, he began to shape his final song. It did not come all at once. It arrived in fragments, in dreams and thunder, in terrifying silences that hollowed him out. He did not write it. He uncovered it. A secret melody buried between the folds of the world. It refused to be still. It shifted with his breath, curled with his pulse. It was not a song to be performed. It was truth made sound. He heard the birth of stars in its opening note. The fall of empires in its dying cadence. It was not sorrow. It was not joy. It simply was. He labored in solitude for weeks, perhaps months or years. Time bent like light through crystal in that cave. He slept only when the song permitted it. Ate only when the silence grew merciful. He wept as often as he laughed, possessed not by madness, but by something deeper. The music didn't come from him, it moved through him. And then, one day it ended. And the world paused. Birds froze in midair. Trees tilted toward the mountain despite the still wind. Streams ceased their murmur. The sky hushed, as if listening. And in Olympus, the marble silence of the gods broke. Even the fates turned their heads. Clotho whispered, a thread trembles. Lachesis frowned. And Atropos, whose shears had never once hesitated, lowered them. They listened. The song did not ask for worship. It did not plead to be loved. It simply revealed everything. And when the final note faded, even the cave refused to echo it, as if repeating it would be sacrilege. The gods waited. The muses waited. They expected Melanion to step forward and gift this wonder to the world. But he did not. He concealed it. And in doing so, he set a different kind of music in motion, one made of silence and consequence. When Melanion finally emerged from the cave, the world felt narrower. The sky, once infinite, seemed pale beside the echoes still thrumming in his bones. Crowds gathered. Musicians. Priests. Poets. They flooded to him, pleading to hear what he had written, to touch whatever force had shaken Olympus. But Melanian had already learned. Some songs are not meant to be shared, only carried. But Melanian said nothing. They asked again. He only smiled, softly, distantly. Not yet. Only the muses noticed the change. One twilight they emerged once more, stepping through starlight like breath drawn from a lyre's lips. Their robes shimmered with inspiration, but their eyes held the weight of something darker, warning. You were chosen to carry beauty, Arado said, her voice soft, laced with sorrow. But beauty is not meant to be buried, Cleo added, the edge of urgency in her tone. You must sing it, Calliope whispered. Melanian lowered his head. I will not see it cheapened. The air shifted. They recoiled, not in fear, but in heartbreak. You think mortals unworthy? Asked Terpsy, her voice trembling. You think only you are fit to guard the divine? He looked up, not with defiance, not with anger, but with something colder. Possession. Yes. And in that single word, silence settled like frost. Then you are no longer ours, Calliope said. Not because you created something beyond us, but because you keep it from the world. Melanian said nothing, and they vanished. Still, the heavens waited. Even Zeus, Lord of Thunder, quieted his storms to listen. Even Hades, deep beneath the soil, leaned forward in silence. They waited, for a note, a breath, a fragment. But none came. Melanian kept the song locked within him. Not inked on parchment. Not hummed beneath breath. It remained untouched, sealed in the hollow chamber of his pride. He called it sacred. But sacred things, when hoarded too long, begin to rot. He continued to perform. His music still stirred hearts, brought tears, ignited hope. Crowds still gathered. Kings still wept. But he knew. And so did the gods. Something was missing. Worse, something had been stolen. The song that could weave fate, unravel time, and brush the fingertips of the divine lay buried beneath the iron weight of his ego. He told himself it was protection. But the muses, watching from afar, saw the truth. He had chained the sacred to himself. And the gods, who endure madness, war, and worship without trembling, do not abide theft. So one night, the winds stopped moving. The stars dimmed. And the curse began. Not in fire. Not in thunder. But in memory. It came gently, almost kindly. Melanian lay beneath an open sky, cradled in the silence he had once worshipped. Sleep took him like a lover, soft, slow, certain. And in the dream, the song returned. It was more beautiful than he remembered, fuller, deeper, and possibly perfect. Notes he had never written swelled around him. Harmonies he had never imagined wrapped him in warmth and awe. It lifted him, through constellations, through oceans, through the very threads of meaning itself. He wept in wonder, in surrender. Then sorrow. Because it was gone. Not faded. Erased. No trace. No echo. Not a note. Not even a name. The melody he had carved from his soul, held in his marrow, it vanished like morning mist. At first, he thought it a cruel dream. Desperate, he snatched up his lyre, strummed wildly, reached for even the faintest hint of the music. Nothing. He struck wrong chords, trembled, cried out. Nothing. That night, heart pounding, he returned to sleep early, hoping. And there, in the dream, it returned again. Radiant. He wept. He sang. His hands moved through light. It felt real. And in the dream, he could remember it. But once again, as dawn stole its first breath from the sky, Melanian lit his candles and refused to sleep. Night after night he scratched ink into parchment in the dark, chasing a rhythm, a phrase, even a single lingering note. He begged his mind to hold on to the song, to trap even a sliver of it. But every time, it slipped through his fingers. He ceased performing altogether. No more songs, no more lyre. The crowds faded. Friends disappeared. Dust settled thick over the corners of his home, the air grew colder, but none of it mattered. One obsession remained. Remember the song. From afar, the muses watched with quiet grief. He was given a gift, murmured Euterpe, and chose to bury it in silence. Now he is the only one who will hear it, said Polyhymnia, and never hold it. It is not vengeance, whispered Clio, it is balance. And so it was. Milanion would hear the song each night for the rest of his life, but only in dreams. Each sunrise it would vanish like water slipping through cracked palms. He would never stop chasing it. And over time, that hunger would rot into madness. For what greater torment exists for a bard than forgetting the greatest song he's ever known, while knowing it still sings somewhere, without him? Milanion lost track of the nights. They blurred together, a never-ending tide of bliss and loss. Each dusk he drifted into sleep, and the song would embrace him like a long-lost lover returned from war. But every dawn he awoke hollow, gasping, screaming, blank. At first, he tried to outsmart the curse. He hired scribes to sleep beside him, begged oracles to extract the music from his dreams. He sang to mirrors in desperation, praying his own voice might betray a memory. But nothing worked. The music remained locked beyond reach. And slowly, he began to unravel. He stopped eating. His robes hung loose over a frame grown skeletal. His fingers trembled when they touched the lyre, the same lyre he once carried like a child. Strings snapped beneath his grip. He didn't bother to replace them. He didn't need them. Because the music came only in sleep. And sleep became everything. The only place he was whole. Waking was punishment. He cursed the sun. He shattered his windows. He sealed himself in a chamber without light. But even in that darkness, the song fled each morning. Its silence more agonizing than any scream. When he emerged, he no longer resembled the bard who once made kings weep. His eyes were wild, his cheeks hollow. His voice, once gold spun into melody, was now hoarse and broken from endless nights of desperate humming. He wandered from village to village like a beggar. But he did not ask for coin. He begged for memory. Have you heard it? He asked strangers in hushed, frantic tones. The song with no beginning, no end. Have you heard it in your sleep? At first they pitied him. Then they feared him. Some threw stones. Others locked their doors. Milanion began to sing in the streets, fragmented, frenzied bursts of melody that made no sense to anyone else. But to him, they were fragments. Clues. Pieces of a shattered mirror he could nearly reassemble. Nearly. But every time, it slipped away. He laughed when he failed. Then he cried. Then he laughed again. And still, somewhere deep within, the song continued to sing, just beyond reach. And every night, the song returned. Whole. Luminous. Just beyond reach. The muses watched, not in anger, but in mourning. He had once been their finest vessel. Now, he was a cracked jar, spilling music into silence when no one was listening. And in that slow descent, the very song he had once hidden became the thing that unraveled him, not with thunder, not with fire, but with stillness. Milanion no longer lived in the world. His body moved through it, yes, but his mind floated somewhere else, caught between the warmth of dreams and the cold edge of waking. He carried a song that sang only in sleep, and only when it was too late to hold. He wandered barefoot through cities that had once raised banners in his name. Children who once gathered at his feet now crossed streets to avoid his shadow. His name, once spoken like a prayer, had become a warning, don't end up like Milanion. He slept where he could, beneath trees, in forgotten chapels, in the doorways of inns where he had once been begged to play. He no longer asked for food. Only a place to lie down. Only the dream. The curse was consistent, cruel in its precision. Each night, he would drift into sleep with hope clenched in his chest. And each night, the song would return. Whole. Alive. A ghost of something divine. And each morning, he woke to forgetting. The pain wasn't in the silence. It was in the memory of sound. He remembered that he had heard something sacred, transcendent, something that had once meant everything. But never why. Never how. He began speaking to shadows, to branches, to stars. Sometimes he would sing to strangers in the street and beg them to echo a line back, convinced the melody was hiding in someone else's voice. Once, he heard a child hum a tune in passing. Convinced it was the song, he followed the family across 2 villages. He collapsed in the dust at their feet, pleading with the boy to sing it again. But it had been nothing. Just a tune. Ordinary. He wept for hours. And still, the song came again the next night, beautiful, cruel, untouched. He tried humming it in his sleep. Tried to wake with it still in his throat. But the curse was clever. In the dream, he could not move. He could not write it. Could not carry it. Only hear it. And when he awoke, only emptiness. Some claimed that if you pressed your ear near his mouth at midnight, you could still hear a music unlike any other, a whisper of what had once been divine. But only then. Only in darkness. The muses stopped coming. The gods turned their gaze elsewhere. And Milanian, once the voice of the world, now wandered like a forgotten echo of a song that no one remembered, except him. And he could not forget. Milanian grew thin as twilight. His skin, once kissed with golden warmth, turned pale and parchment-like. His voice, once able to command weeping from kings, had become hoarse, frayed from years of mumbling to ghosts and silence. He no longer sought food. Nor the song. Nor redemption. He simply walked. One evening, he reached a cliff above the sea. It was quiet there. No villages. No roads. No eyes to watch. Only wind, waves, and the slow rise of stars in a deepening blue sky. He curled against a stone. The sea breeze played gently with the last strands of his hair. He did not cry. He did not sing. He simply closed his eyes. And once more the dream came. But this time, something was different. There was no delay. No fog to wade through. No struggle to grasp the sound. The final song greeted him at once, complete, radiant, and clear. Yet it wasn't merely music. It was a place, a world, a presence spun from sound and silence alike. Milanian stood within it, barefoot on chords that bent beneath him like soft grass. Above, the stars pulsed in rhythm. The sky itself was a symphony. The wind sang in harmony, and he wasn't just listening anymore. He was a part of it. His voice rose to join the melody. It didn't waver. It didn't falter. It soared. And in that moment, he saw every note he'd lost, every phrase he had grieved. But now, he understood. The song had never abandoned him. It had grown beyond him. It was never his to hold. He had only been chosen to witness it. And in that final dream, there was no sorrow, no shame, no punishment. Only peace. Only release. When the sun rose, Milanian didn't stir. The wind moved gently over his still body, as if lifting his final breath into the air. A shepherd passing the cliffs found him later that day, peaceful, hands folded over his chest as if cradling an invisible lyre. There was no scroll beside him. No words recorded. But high above, in the open sky, seabirds danced in unfamiliar formations, weaving through the clouds as if following a rhythm only they could hear. And the sea, for a fleeting moment, sang. Not with melody, not with voice, but with something older, deeper. Something he had finally become. Melanien was buried beneath a lone olive tree on the edge of that same cliff. No priest read the rites. No crowds came. Only the shepherd who found him and a handful of villagers who remembered faint stories. Tales of a bard who once made even gods pause. There was no monument. Only silence. But silence has a way of holding truth. In the years that followed, whispers stirred across the land. Travelers claimed that if you passed that cliff under a new moon, you might hear something in the wind, brief, vanishing, heartbreakingly beautiful. Just a note. Just enough to make you stop. Children began dreaming of music they had never heard. Musicians awoke with tears on their faces and no memory of why. And sometimes, when a bard sat alone at dusk, with no one watching, their fingers would form a chord they didn't recognize. Something perfect. Something not theirs. They never remembered it come morning. The muses said nothing. They did not curse another bard. They did not reclaim the song. Because they understood what Melanien had become, not a warning, not a martyr, not even a hero. But a vessel turned into legend. A soul whose punishment was born not from cruelty, but from refusal, and whose redemption came not through performance, but surrender. The final song was never written. It was never sung in amphitheaters or temples. It lives not in scrolls or memory, but in the quiet. In that fragile breathe between sleep and waking. In the stillness before the first note is struck. In the way the ocean sounds different when your heart is breaking. Melanien's song became part of the world itself. Not to be remembered, but to be felt. A whisper in the marrow. A melody without words. And those who feel it, even for a moment, never forget the silence that follows. They say if you stand alone, on the right cliff, on the right night, with no one watching and the wind at your back, you may hear a sound not born of this world. Just a fragment. Just a breath. And if you listen closely enough, you may finally understand why Melanien could never let it go.